I'm excited to be here. The last time we all had an opportunity to meet with Brooke and hear a lot about housing. And the reason why that was important to Habitat Kent was really for us to take some time and to understand really the housing crisis in Kent County. And so we learned a lot about the number of homes we needed, low income housing, all the way to housing by choice. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the effects of that. Some of the zoning that Housing Kent has recently been part of has been hugely effective for Habitat Kent. So you may have been watching the news and heard that ADUs are something that we're able to begin to do. So ADUs as relative to housing for affordable housing would allow us to look at generational wealth and wealth for homeowners. Changes in parking, right? So there was a lot of conversation around parking and what that meant in Kent County and the city of Grand Rapids. Well, that's important for us. And you'll see later one of the large projects that we will be unveiling to you. And that's important to us to be able to increase the density of housing and have more housing and really less space for those types of things. So really the work around housing is deep and wide. And so Brooke was kind of our first walk through that. When we talk about Habitat Kent and we talk about where we fit in the housing continuum, we have a lot of folks here today that are in different places in the housing continuum. So Housing Kent of Kent County and West Michigan really spent time trying to get us all speaking the same language around housing. And so when you look at Habitat Kent, we really consider ourselves to be working in the stably housed segment or the continuum. And that's where we really are looking where homeowners stand. So when we talk about the difference between rental housing and stable housing, one of the things we know about housing that we provide is that our home buyer, our homeowner is now paying 30% of their income towards housing, which we're basically saying they are not cost burden when they're in that space. And so that begins a space of stably housed, a decent place for folks to live, a safe home, and really a place where they can count on a very continuous, same monthly mortgage for their home. So we hear of many folks who are in the rental housing where that's the instability is changes in your rent, eviction issues. So the beginning of being stably housed really begins with home ownership. So we wanted to kind of give you a space of where Habitat is. When we talk about Habitat Kent, a lot of folks know what we do, and there's a lot more to housing than just building a bunch of homes. So we spend a lot of time working with families. We provide opportunities for folks to become engaged in their neighborhoods, but the important piece of what we do at Habitat Kent is really walking alongside families, preparing for them for what this home ownership experience and journey will look like. It's been kind of a long road to get here, but a very exciting one. So if you were with us this fall, you know that we celebrate our 40th year of being Habitat of Kent County. So in 1983, the first, here's a whole bunch of volunteers walking by. So we want to say thank you to them for what they're doing. Our first offices started in Kent County, and we really were known as Habitat for Humanity of Grand Rapids. I had the opportunity to meet with the first executive director of Habitat Kent, and it was really remarkable to think about a one-person operation building the very first home of Habitat Kent. And 500 homes later, we just celebrated that very first home. In 2006, we did our first LEED affordable house. And so when we talk about Habitat, one of the spaces where we spend a lot of time is really in that space of sustainability. We have a restore retail location, and the idea behind that is taking your new and used housing supplies and donating them to a restore. It keeps them out of the landfill. All of our homes are Energy Star and LEED certified, which means we spent a great deal of time making sure that our home buyer is in a very energy efficient home. And so we know that when they're in this safety sit home, where they may have been in another home where their utilities were very high, we know that they're going into a space that is safe, the air is safe, the environment is safe. And so really spending a lot of time talking about LEED and other spaces really allows us to provide that. In 2010, we came designated as neighborhood revitalization. And that's really how we look at ourselves today. We look at ourselves as moving into a neighborhood and really developing the neighborhood. Sometimes that might be repairs on homes. Other times it might be rehabs or building homes. But the deeper conversation begins with our team that is in the community, talking to neighbors, really working on the quality of life in that neighborhood, and trying to take that voice and develop a thriving neighbor. In 2020, we completed Plaza Roosevelt, and that is probably, if you have been part of Habitat in the last few years at all, this is probably a thing you've heard us talk about all the time, is Plaza. So Plaza was really our first work in neighborhood, our first work with partners, where we pulled 9 partners around the table and built a really big neighborhood kind of presence. So we have on Plaza, we have affordable housing in the shape of apartments and homes. There's a brand new school in that space. Clinica has added a pharmacy in that space. And so we really got together, took the quality of life framework and said, how do we develop a neighborhood that becomes thriving for folks who are there? And so in 2020, we finished that. I think our last homeowner moved in just a year or so ago. And so we've really begun to develop. And that is probably when Habitat kind of flipped the switch and started to say, how is it that we become deeper in neighborhood, and how do we really begin to look at density in our building? In 2021, we did our first all-electric zero emissions home. So now we're like looking at ourselves saying, how do we continue this sustainability road? How is it that we go from LEED certifications and Energy Star to now really saying, what is the carbon footprint that we leave in the community? And this was our first attempt at that. And then 2023, we celebrated our 500th home. The exciting piece about our 500th homeowner was it was right down the street from our first homeowner. So in the neighborhoods where we continue to work, we're very excited about the difference we have made. So what we know about quality housing is really in this space of understanding academic achievement. So many of our homeowners talk about their children. And when we talk about generational wealth, I want to think of it more than what's in your pocketbook. But many of our homeowners have really got a stable place to call home, and their children now are beginning to excel academically. So statistically proving that kids and folks are doing better once they're in a safe place. Improved health outcomes. What we know about this is 21% of children who live in, I want to say, not great housing or housing that is not safe or healthy, have a higher incidence of asthma. So we know that statistically. So moving folks into now a safe place where all of the utilities are lower, the air exchange is different, the sustainability, we're building that space there. Improved financial standing. What we know about that is homeowners across the board are 400% increased in their wealth just by living in homes or having home ownership relative to the demographic that's them. So we know that we're providing all of these things and then a stronger, safer community. So integrating people into neighborhoods where they feel comfortable, where they've learned through community engagement or through our leadership classes, how to become a really thriving voice and how to share the message of home ownership. So what do we actually do? Probably most of you in this room know that all of our home buyers have a mortgage, right? We really spend our work or the majority of our time working with folks who are at 80% AMI and lower. So to give you an idea of what 80% AMI means, for a family of 4, that's an income of $80,000. That is the highest maximum that we would allow to work with someone to work in housing and affordable housing. We do construction, so we do new builds, and we also do rehabs. It typically takes our homeowner anywhere between 9 to 18 months to get in a home. So from the time that they apply for our program until they've gone through the financial education pieces and then they've got their mortgage, usually takes that amount of time. And on a typical current basis, we're serving between 10 to 15 families. So that's where we are today. Pretty excited to get kind of where we're going. Financial education and support is really the cornerstone of what we do. So we have homeowner staff here that are really working on a daily and weekly basis with our homeowners. I was sharing with folks in the room, we really wrap our arms around folks. Once they're in our program, it's a constant communication so that we are keeping them in the space of affordable homeownership. We're keeping them on track with budget. We do all kinds of money smart, all kinds of money matters, financial education, budgeting with folks, constant conversations around credit. We're partnering them with lenders. So we're working with them as they go through the process of securing a loan from a bank all the way to closing. So spending a great deal of time educating folks so that they're ready to move into that home and know what home ownership looks like. So imagine if you take yourself back to your first home and you were all excited to get in that home and then all of the multitude of things that you had facing you. We've spent a great deal of time preparing our homeowner for what's next. So if we're working in a condo association, we've prepared them for what it's going to be like to be in an HOA. If we're talking about being close in a neighborhood, we're talking about confrontation skills, right? How many of you are in HOA and it like doesn't always go really, really well? So we're really preparing people for what are those conversations and what does it look like when I'm talking to folks who will be my neighbors for the long term? So it's much more than a financial piece. It's really a piece of how do you thrive in your neighborhood? Who do we introduce you to in your neighborhood so that you know where to go shop, you know your neighbors around you, and you're comfortable in that space. So a lot of our engagement team is really spent out in the neighborhood, really working with homeowners that are currently in the neighborhood, but working with neighbors to make sure they understand what's happening next to them with the Habitat home. And our home buyers during the time are really getting excited about this journey of home ownership. So trying to take those jitters out and prepare folks. Neighborhood engagement is probably one of the most important pieces that we do and is also really something that the city of Grand Rapids spends a great deal of time. I would say we pride ourselves in community engagement. If you're building anything in the city of Grand Rapids, particularly if it's high density, the city is going to ask, have you talked to neighbors? What do neighbors think about what you're doing? And so we dedicate our resources and a team to that. We have folks out in the community asking just that question. I'm about to talk to you in a minute about a project that we're going to start here. And in the moments when we began to start thinking about this, our team got around the table and we knew really how neighbors would feel about certain aspects of what we were about to do. And when that neighborhood voice came in, many of those things were addressed sitting at the table, because spending time in community and understanding that we're building homes in a neighborhood, but you're living in the neighborhood and you're engaging with folks, we want to make sure that the architecture is pleasing to the neighborhood, the density is pleasing to the neighborhood. What will the green space look like? Because it's shared green space. What will all the resources in the neighborhood look like? And how will they impact that community? So neighborhood engagement is really our way of spending time strengthening the home buyer, but also hopefully strengthening the community. So part of the exciting work of what we do is around the families. And I mentioned earlier that we had some conversation around education, generational wealth, and really the part of being the emphasis of being in a stable home. So this is Linda, and she spoke. If you were at our 40th anniversary, she spoke. She talked a little bit about her home, and she kept using the address, which I thought was really cool. Like, I remember my first home that I grew up in as a kid, and I remember the address, but she kept talking about that home and she kept using that address, and her family still drives by that home and her family's still really wanting to understand like what happened there. But what she talks about is how being in that home changed everything about the trajectory of her life. That once she was in a safe, stable place, and her mom would agree, the mortgage payment is consistent. My utility bills are consistent. I'm coming home to the same place. I'm not worried about someone coming and telling me this is the last month that you can be here. So stability is there. And she talked about the feeling of my everything in front of me. I have a whole life in front of me. Everything I want to do, I can do. And so Linda went on to graduate from college, first one in her family to do so. And now she is a vice president of a multinational company. But she continues to look back on that time in her home with her mom and the life-changing piece that it was. Well, this is a special story. It's not unique to Habitat. Right now, we know we have about 1,500 kids in Habitat homes. And so if we think about the number of children that we're impacting on a daily basis and just think about that safe place that they can call home. So the future of Habitat is pretty bright, and this is pretty exciting. Our neighborhood revitalization team is spending a great deal of time really in this space. So where you're sitting right now are our Habitat offices, and on the screen it says existing. And what we envision for our Pleasant Hills is 27 homes that are built for families, low-income housing, in a space of affordability. So the green space in the back will turn into housing. Across the street will be 7 units of housing. And this space right here will be used by a nonprofit to provide resources for community. So as we begin to look at what is different for Habitat Kent, it really is around density. Many of you are familiar with our single family homes that we do throughout community. Our first attempt at density really was Plaza. So if you recall, there's 5 units down there, 4 units, and then single family units. And so as we start to look at this will look like density of 5 units or density of 2 units, but it's really beginning to develop a space that families could stand out here and maybe watch the fireworks, but 27 families will begin to live and thrive here. And so this is what lies ahead for Habitat. And as we begin to think about what's different, when many nonprofits were sent home during COVID, Habitat Kent really spent some time on strategy. And really, I think for many of us, it was, if we come out of COVID, if we're able to be sustainable and we can continue funding and building, what will we look like? And what will we be handling different than we do today? As we started to address the housing crisis, we really began to say, one of the things that was most important to us was, how do we take that donor dollar that we get from folks and make sure that it's in the most impactful space that it can be? How do we increase our impact? And how do we begin to solve the housing crisis from an affordable lens? And so the 4 things you see up here are the beginning steps to doing that. We began to talk about third-party lending. So many folks associate Habitat with a 0% mortgage. As we began to explore, what is it that we want? How do we want to build generational wealth? How do we want to equip families? And so walking alongside with them as they partner with banks was the beginning way to introduce folks who were eligible for mortgages but were uncomfortable walking in, was helping Habitat Kent increase our impact so that the amount philanthropy is supporting on a Habitat home is really helping us to be more impactful in the capacity and number that we build. So when I talk about the 15 homes that Habitat typically builds or rehabs in a year, we have dreams to get to 30, and we'll be able to do that through things like third-party lending and also third-party builders. So if I talk about 27 units here, some of these units will be built by a third-party builder, still using all of our energy and LEED standards, still doing all of our aging in place requirements, doing all the things that we know important to make sure that we build a sustainable home, but allowing us to increase our impact. We also have continued to make sure our homes are owner occupied. What that means is if you go to sell your Habitat home, it stays owner occupied, meaning you can't sell it to someone who will turn it into a rental. It is how we maintain home ownership in our community. Long-lasting affordability and our affordable deed restriction are really based on how do we build a home that is donor supported and make sure that for the existing time of that home, it remains affordable. And we do that by the deed restriction. What that requires is when someone purchases a Habitat home, it will remain affordable for the next 90 years. So if someone wants to come in and buy that home, it will remain affordable. They have to be at least 120% AMI or lower. And those donor dollars that went in to subsidize that home remain in that home for the 90 years. Habitat always has the first right to repurchase homes. So we will continue that pipeline of low-income buyers and then move them into that home. So homes that used to be sold on the market at market value are now staying affordable for really the length of the term of the home. So just really flipping the switch on how do we make sure that our dollars stay and that our capacity is built. And long-term, long-lasting affordability is that space where we begin to look how we can be more impactful with our donor dollars. As we think about what is ahead for the future, I can tell you it's pretty exciting here. We're using the word imagine a lot, and in the fall you'll hear a little bit more about what imagine means. But we have, as an affiliate, have spent a lot of time imagining what could be different. And so this Pleasant Hills project and how we're looking at financing and building homes is really in that space of being innovative and trying to really turn housing kind of on its head and say, how do we do this differently? How do we partner with others in the community? And how do we make sure that we're making a lasting impact? And that takes us to our Q&A. So I'm wondering if anybody has any questions or anything that I slid over.
I was wondering what defines the affordability restriction. You mentioned AMI. Is that market interest rate?
That's area median income. So we're looking at so each county basically has an area median income. So for us, for a family of 4, it's around $80,000. So it slides up and down depending on the size of your family. But that's basically saying to come into our home ownership program, that is your income. We're taking folks then to the bank for third-party lending, and they're being qualified for a portion of what the cost of that home may be. And so the subsidy of the affordability piece comes in to make sure that we're selling that house at the appraised value, but our homeowner's mortgage is never more than 30% of their income.
You say you work with 10 to 15 people at any given time. Is there demand for more?
Oh my goodness, yes.
And how do people find you, and how do you choose who the 10 and 15 are going to be? Is there a long waiting list? How does that look like?
So because we've changed our model, I'll give you 2 examples. When we did an application project program and our 0% mortgage, we would send out about 1,000 applications a year to our wait list. We would get about 300 applications in, and then we had to go through kind of a vetting. So we look at ability to pay, willingness to partner. So you're going to walk alongside and do, the financial education classes, and then need. And that's really that space of what is your current housing, or what is your situation? What is the health of your family? Like, what is the need to come into housing, which most folks who are in that AMI have an ability or have the need for housing. And so from those 300 that would turn the application, then the processing and the vetting began. So it was credit checks. It was really looking at their ability to pay, what it looked like in their budget and their financial world. So that was when we used the 0% mortgage and was really vetted through just one support system we used for those mortgages. As we began to look at a new process, we started to engage banks, realizing that they have CRA credits, right? And so while they're not providing a lower interest rate, they are providing a lot of income resources alongside that. So they're providing down payment assistance and some other assistance to home buyers, right? So really what we're saying now is as folks come in and see a home, they'll begin to say, okay, this is the amount of money that I can get from a bank, and then this is the process. So we've gone from a huge wait list to really a rolling queue of home buyers. And so and cross your fingers that this works, as we begin to develop the Pleasant Hills project, what we know happened down in Plaza Roosevelt was it generated a lot of interest. It didn't take us long to find 17 home buyers for those homes. So we know that it won't take long to find the home buyers. We've lengthened the amount of time. So earlier I talked about it took 18 months to get our program. It will now take 9. So we've alleviated a great deal of the requirements. So one of those was that all home buyers were required to work on site for 100 hours of construction. That was our sweat equity program. Due to how we look at housing and really the racial issues around housing, we began to identify there were a lot of inequities around sweat equity. So when we remove sweat equity and those requirements, it now allows home buyers to get in homes quicker and faster, and then allows them the opportunity to come on site and volunteer, just like you and I do, and walk alongside others. So it was really taking a program and saying, here's where it stands today. How can we make it equitable? How can we make it more efficient and quicker? And how can we get families into homes more rapid and still build generational wealth, make sure they're at 30% of their income, and really begin to do a thriving. What we have seen in the new model is many of our home buyers who were in the 0% mortgage program that took 18 months may have had a bump in the road. They may have needed to go buy a new car. And the lender that we were using at that time was like, oh, this just put them upside down, and now they're over 30% of their income, right? Banks are providing mortgages for those folks who were traditionally just not thinking that they could walk into a bank. So providing that opportunity really is how we're looking at that piece of how we're doing things differently.
The generational wealth piece and you having that like deed restriction, my question is, like we were just talking about, my home's value has tripled since I moved into it, so obviously that's gonna be a huge benefit for me in the future. How are these homeowners getting similar experiences with the rising values? I understand wanting to make sure that the home stays available if somebody moves on, but how are those families benefiting from being able to sell their homes?
So they still have a mortgage, right?
Yep.
So they're still paying on a mortgage. So they'll, as the time that they spend in the home, there's a formula of a lot of increased equity. So the longer folks are in the home, the more equity they would see, just like you. And it's all based on the amount of the mortgage that they have. And so folks will walk away with generational wealth, similar to a land trust, but because we have the ability to own the property, folks will still walk away. We'll be able to find that home buyer for them, so they won't have to go out on the market and look for folks that are looking for affordable housing. And so it allows for generational wealth over the long term. It's built right into the mortgage. So folks will know at the time of signing their mortgage exactly what the value, or at least what the estimated value of their home will be throughout that process.
So with the Pleasant community,
Pleasant Hills.
Exactly, so the existing building is this building and you're gonna be building around? So is it still gonna be Habitat's offices? Or
Well,
Habitat gonna be moving out?
yes. So part of what our vision for Habitat is to provide a space for all of us to be together. So our dream is to have our offices, a restore location, our warehouse all in one space. And so we're currently looking for a space that'll just do all of those things, which apparently in Grand Rapids is a little bit of a unicorn, right? And so, but that's the vision. The also vision for this space is, this was a Grand Rapids public school in the day, right? And so providing a space that provides resources for these families is really what we're after here. So we were intentional in saying this space needs to stay and thrive and live, and how can it be more of a resource for a community?
So with, because I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at the property.
Yeah.
around here, this is only, I think it's
Let
like
me
the third time I've been here.
Let me go back.
What, you know, is all of that space currently,
So this is where we stand right now.
right?
And then there's a church right here. So when you leave, you'll see a church there.
Okay.
We purchased that property a couple years ago.
Okay.
And then across the street. Is that this, Andrew?
Yep.
Okay, so across the street, there's a small church called the Matthews Church right across the street that we acquired, and then you'll see our warehouse there. So this will be 7 units across the street, and then this will be 20 units here.
Okay, and this is all currently kind of open.
It will be, as soon as we tear down both of the churches,
Oh.
it'll be open space. So that's what's happening here. And then, believe it or not, our property goes all the way back, kind of. So I'm sure when you leave now, you're gonna like drive around.
Yeah.
So there's a little street called Church Place here, and if you go down, you'll run into where our cottage is. And that will kind of help you see
Okay.
that this will all be housing back in there. And then where we're sitting today, right, it would be like these houses right here. So current parking lot as it exists now.
Okay, great, thanks.
What's the square footage of these homes and what will they cost?
1,600 square feet. Cost to build is still being figured out.
Yeah.
Roughly around 400,000. And the intended sales price is around 180,000.
What are some of the trends you're seeing as far as need? How has that shifted over the last 5 years?
Because the need is just so great, I think our mind has changed around density. So the American dream, right, is like 4 walls on a lot. And that's a beautiful American dream, but it gets very difficult to find the land and really for affordability. So as we start to look at what we're particularly doing, it's developments like this that have more units, still individual homes, owning the property and the home, but really saying, how are we doing density? And at the same time, how are we preparing homeowners to be in that space of density? And so I think some of the things that I found most interesting is it appears that the city and the county are looking at, we call it missing middle housing from a financing point, but there's missing middle housing that really is developing these small communities and really developing a community that is walkable, close to downtown, is sustainable, and is really like, I mean, imagine 27 families here now where they weren't before. So taking these pieces of property and really trying to turn it more into a neighborhood than anything else. I believe that's our vision. Will we ever walk away from individual homes throughout Grand Rapids? No. Will we ever walk away from volunteers being on site helping us build? No. It's an important piece of who we are and what we do. But to increase that impact, we feel like we need to bring in others to help.
So with the densely, more densely populated communities, is there certain collaboration with transportation in the city as far as getting like public transportation? Obviously, you can't have as much parking in a more densely populated community. So has there been collaboration with the, city works and transportation in regard to that when it comes to location?
There's a requirement for a number of parking spots, no matter what you do. So know that. But we typically build in 3 different neighborhoods: Baxter, Black Hills, and Roosevelt Park neighborhood. And so we also make sure that there's transit close by. So we know where the bus stops are for our home buyers typically. So where we're currently building, that always is in existence. Is there a collaboration with transportation? No, there's not an ongoing conversation around how to increase busing. It would be great. I would say probably from the standpoint of someone who uses busing, could I get someplace quicker than I do now and rely on busing? But we typically make sure that there's accessibility to busing near all of our neighborhoods.
The financial bottom line, the only factor are the things like, US citizen, you have a penalty, felony in your life, and how much of that is determined by the loaning people and how much is determined by habitat.
So Habitat puts folks through kind of a qualification process. And so we have to follow fair housing, so we cannot turn folks away unless they are a detriment to society, right? So typically we are doing background checks on homeowners, but we're really not in that space of excluding folks, particularly around that. Fair housing requires certain documentation for housing, so we have to follow all of that, which is changing a bit. So that's exciting in the world of housing. And then when we talk about ability to pay, that's where we're really saying, folks, we want to make sure that when you are in this housing situation, it's long-term for you, 30% of your income. So we're spending a great deal of time making sure that folks are in that space. Foreclosure on a Habitat home is about 3% for us of the 400 homes 500 homes we've done. So if you think about that foreclosure rate, we are making sure folks have the ability to pay. That need is really important to us. So while we're not saying that your need doesn't count, or that the reason why you think you need a home is not important, what we're saying is, if there's any reason that housing is, something's happening in your housing, your children have asthma, you have chronic disease, you need wheelchair accessibility and you don't have it, just different things, then we're saying, okay, that's a need. And then partnering with us is basically saying, are you willing to walk along this journey? Because it's rigorous. You're going to go through education classes, you're going to go through banking, you're going to go through closing. Are you willing to partner with Habitat in that space? And those are the requirements we're really looking at when folks come in to Habitat. Great. Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate your time.